Episode 24, Duncan Donuts, originally posted January 21, 2013. When I got my first two Masters of the Universe figures, I did what every kid instinctively does when he gets a new toy. Look at the back of the packaging to see what other figures were available in the line. Unsurprisingly, my eyes didn't automatically navigate to the scantily clad muscle man in furry briefs, but instead focused on the guy next to him. Upon first sight, manatarms instantly became my favorite master. I mean, what kid wouldn't like a guy decked out in armor like a tank, with his face mysteriously half covered up with a grill? Was he a knight? A robot? Whatever he was, all I knew was that hands down he was definitely more visually interesting than He-Man, and I knew he had to be mine. Unfortunately, He-Man figures weren't something I could really afford in my own allowance, nor do I recall them being readily available in local stores. So I really had to rely on my dad's out-of-country business trips to satisfy my He-Man fix. So long story short, I never got Man-at-Arms, or at least one that really was truly mine. I did, however, manage to convince my friend to share his Man-at-Arms with me and leave it in my house for long periods of time, until he pretty much forgot about it. When the Masters of the Universe cartoon from Filmation came out, Man-at-Arms' character was further fleshed out. Prior to this, all we knew about him was what we read in the mini-comics that came with the figures, and in there, he was depicted as a straightforward warrior. But in the cartoons, Man-at-Arms was presented as a much older man who wasn't too much of a warrior and more of an advisor. What did stay the same was that Man-at-Arms was still one of He-Man's closest allies. In fact, he was one of the very few who actually knew that he was secretly Prince Adam. He was also made into the adoptive father of Teela, who was entrusted him to raise as his own by her real mother, the sorceress. And well, he didn't see that much action. In fact, I seem to recall him spending more time being in trouble and waiting to be rescued than actually kicking ass. His character design was also softened, now sporting a thick mustache, and with his armor simplified, making him less imposing. One specific design choice from the original character that I liked was that only his left arm and leg were armored. This made him look like an ancient Roman gladiator. Unfortunately, in order to simplify the animation process, non-symmetrical designs like Clawful's bigger right claw were ditched whenever possible in order to allow animators to simply flip an animation cell over should they need the character to face the other direction. As a result, Man-at-Arms got his armor on both legs and arms. Sure, it made more sense to have more armor, but it just didn't look as cool. Oh, and he was also given a first name, Duncan, which to me made him sound like a guy who made and sold donuts or owned a bunch of rebellious crayons, rather than being a close ally of the most powerful man in the universe. Love or hate it, however, because the cartoon did really well and was on the air for some time, this version of Man-at-Arms basically became the default version for almost everybody. Years later though, in the 2002 reboot, the Man-at-Arms character was slightly tweaked for the better. He was still older, still Teela's adopted father, still had the mustache, and was still called Duncan. The main difference was in his character and function. They put more emphasis on his role as an inventor and weapons expert, a true man-at-arms, if you will. His armor also got an upgrade. No longer was it just plain simple armor, but armor that housed dozens of weapons that he could activate at any time, including a huge arm cannon that would transform him into a living weapon. They basically made him into a much cooler cross between James Bond's Q and Iron Man. Now, when the classic Masters line came out, Man-at-Arms was obviously one of the first characters to be made. When he was announced, many wondered exactly what version of Man-at-Arms they would go for. Since it was a classic line, many assumed it would be based on the original vintage, clean-shaven version. But thanks to the long-running Filmation cartoon, his softer mustachioed look was more iconic. And although Mattel established from the get-go that the more hyper-detailed 2002 character style was retired, they added that they would allow a few style elements based off it when they could. So, which Man-at-Arms would we get? The answer wasn't all that shocking and was thankfully quite satisfying. Since it was called the Classics line, pretty much the entire figure was directly based off the original toy. They did, however, manage to throw in something to appease fans of the Filmation cartoon. They included an extra alternate head that sported his familiar mustache. And, as if that wasn't enough, as a nod to the 2000 cartoon fans, they added even more extras. First, to emphasize his role as Master of Weapons, they included, well, more weapons. The original toy only came with his trusty mace. This new one came with an extra short sword and a gun that could easily be stored on his back. But the real gem was this. Okay, allow me to go a little off course to explain. During the very early planning stages of the 2002 cartoon, the writers proposed to Mattel the idea of starting the new series off with Skeletor finally being successful in capturing the original Power Sword. This was the sword that Prince Adam used to transform into He-Man. So, Duncan would have built a new power sword with the help of some magic of the sorceress, which would mimic the original sword's ability to transform Adam into He-Man. Mattel didn't go for this idea and scrapped it. However, the new design of the sword, which looked more mechanical, was kept and became the default look of the power sword, much to the agony of many He-Man purists. Anyway, a few years later into the Classics line, Mattel surprised everyone with a new version of manatarms called Snake Manatarms. Okay, so allow me to explain again. Towards the end of the 2002 series, the writers introduced a new enemy faction to battle He-Man. This was King Hiss and his army of snake men. Now the idea was that King Hiss had this really powerful artifact called the Serpent's Ring that could transform any person into an evil snake man. So as the story was supposed to go, using the ring, King Hiss would successfully transform Man-at-Arms into a snake man. Permanently. I say supposed to because the cartoon was cancelled before they could actually do this. In any case, based on this aborted storyline, Mattel gave us a Snake Man-at-Arms figure, which was basically the original Man-at-Arms figure with a newly sculpted snake head and an additional serpent ring accessory. Unfortunately, they decided to remove all the cool extra weapons that came with the original figure. So when the first prototype images of Snake Man-at-Arms made their debut online, many collectors cried foul as this seemed like a lazy and blatant cash grab for Mattel. So, in an attempt to placate all the fans, they went back to the drawing board and gave him a few more new parts. Basically, what they did was give him more robotic arms and legs to even further reflect the more technical and robotic version of the Man-at-Arms introduced in the 2002 cartoon. Now with these two figures in hand, you had the option to display Man-at-Arms both as is, or mix and match to come up with the ultimate version based on your preferences. I personally like the 2002 version of Man-at-Arms the best, so I switched the heads between the original and Snake version so I would have a more accurate 2002 Man-at-Arms as my default version. And Mattel didn't stop there in trying to please us fans. As I mentioned earlier, as part of his upgraded 2002 arsenal, Man-at-Arms sported a really cool arm cannon that for many became just as iconic as his trusty mace. So while the original plan was to release this cannon with Snake Man-at-Arms, it was unfortunately left out due to lack of budget. But a few months later, Mattel made up for it by including said cannon as part of an add-on weapons and accessory pack. Anyway, before they officially called it a day for the Classics line, Mattel managed to release one more version of Man-at-Arms, which was included in the release of the iconic He-Man vehicle, the Battle Ram. So what made this version so special? Well, first of all, he came with an unhelmeted head, showing off his snazzy ponytail that he sported in the 2002 cartoon. Secondly, they gave him symmetrical armor as a loose homage to his Filmation look as well. But if you were a Filmation purist, this version, while neat, wouldn't really satiate your appetite. And so fortunately, indie company Super 7, who briefly continued the Classics line with Mattel's blessing, finally gave us a straight-up Filmation version in 2018, which basically covered all our bases for whichever Man-at-Arms floated our boat. And yes, I know there have been more versions of Duncan released since then, specifically in the current Origins and Masterverse lines from Mattel, but I have no real intentions in delving into either of these lines anytime soon. I'm perfectly happy with all the versions I've got from the Classics line. And so that should do it for now. How about you guys? Do you have your personal favorite versions of Duncan? What's your favorite donut? Let me know in the comments below. Tell me your story. Thanks for watching Stories from the Toy Shelf Redux. If you enjoyed this story, please click on the like button and subscribe to the channel to help me tell more. Until the next one.